I never thought I'd hear laughter at my father's funeral. Not from grief, not from comfort, but from a lawyer, a man who laughed right in my stepbrother's face. Moments after he claimed my father's entire estate as his own. Yeah, you heard that right. While my father's coffin still rested beside us, my stepbrother stood there like a king, declaring that everything, my father's house, business, and savings, belonged to him now. And then the lawyer laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a kind one, but a slow, confident laugh that sent chills through the whole room. In that moment, I felt something shift, a strange mix of anger and satisfaction, because deep down, I knew my father wasn't the kind of man to leave this world unprepared. He'd always said, people reveal their true faces when they think they've already won. And my stepbrother? He was showing his right then and there. But before I tell you why that lawyer laughed, and how my father predicted this betrayal long before any of us did, you need to understand what really happened. You need to know what kind of man my father was, and what kind of people surrounded him. Because this isn't just a story about inheritance or greed. It's about how one man's final plan outsmarted everyone who thought they could play him. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll be asking yourself one thing. Would my family do the same? So, if you enjoy stories where karma doesn't wait, where justice hits harder than revenge, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe what happens next. My name's Daniel, and for most of my life, my father was my entire world. He was a builder of homes, of dreams, and of people. The kind of man who never raised his voice, but somehow, everyone listened when he spoke. Growing up, it was just the two of us after Mom passed. We didn't have much, but he gave me everything that mattered. Discipline, kindness, and that quiet strength that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Things changed a few years ago when he remarried. That's when they entered the picture. My stepmother, elegant but cold, and her son, Evan. My new stepbrother, charming smile, expensive watch, and a confidence that felt fake. The kind of man who shakes your hand while measuring your worth. At first, I tried to believe it could work. Family dinners, polite conversations. My father wanted peace, but I saw the shift. Evan started showing up at Dad's office more, handling small things, giving advice. He talked like he owned the place already. And Dad, well, he never said much, but I could tell. He noticed everything. One night I overheard them talking. My father told Evan he trusted him, but he trusted the law more. It was an odd thing to say at the time, but looking back, that single line explained everything that happened later. Dad's health began to decline about a year after that. Nothing dramatic, just age catching up, stress taking its toll. Evan was suddenly the most devoted son in the world. Always by his side, always talking about future plans, acting like he was already the head of the family. I stayed quiet, helped when I could, and prayed that my father's trust wouldn't be misplaced. And then, one morning, Dad called me into his study. He looked tired, but there was a calm in his eyes. He said, "Daniel, I've made sure everything is taken care of. Don't argue. Just remember, I know who's who." I didn't understand then, but I felt a strange relief, like he was preparing for something none of us could see coming. A few weeks later, he was gone. At the funeral, everyone showed up in black, pretending to care. The house was filled with soft music, fake tears, and whispered questions about the will, and that's when my stepbrother made his move. After the funeral, I kept replaying the last few months of my father's life in my head. There were warning signs, little things that only made sense later. The way he'd pause before signing documents, how he kept certain folders locked in his study, and the quiet tension that always filled the room when Evan walked in. Dad's health had started to fade slowly. It began with fatigue, then hospital visits, then that constant silence that made me feel helpless. I tried to be there every day, but Evan, he made sure he was there even more. Not because he cared, but because he wanted to be seen caring. You know the type. Fake sympathy, loud concern, always making sure everyone knew how devoted he was. He'd bring expensive fruit baskets, speak softly to the nurses, and sit by my father's bedside like he was some guardian angel. But whenever Dad drifted off to sleep, Evan's eyes would change. Cold, calculating, watching the monitors, not my father, watching the time. One evening I caught him going through Dad's files. He pretended it was nothing, said he was organizing things for when Dad got better. But the way he closed that folder so fast, I knew better. My father's company, his assets, his estate, all of it was in those papers. A few days later, Dad asked for me again. He looked weak, but his mind was sharp. "Daniel," he said, "promise me you won't argue with whatever happens after I'm gone. Just trust what I've arranged." His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. That look, it stayed with me. After that, he began keeping meetings with his lawyer private. Sometimes the lawyer would leave the house with a faint smile, like they shared some secret. I didn't press. It felt like one of those things you're not supposed to know until the right time. Meanwhile, Evan grew bolder. He started talking like he was already in charge, telling the staff how things would be once Dad's estate is settled, making little jokes about running the show. It made my blood boil, but I stayed silent, because I had a feeling Dad wanted me to. Then came the night everything changed. The nurse called. It was late, maybe past midnight. Dad's condition had worsened. By the time I got there, he was barely conscious. He took my hand, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Remember what I said, son. I know who's who." And just like that, he was gone. I thought that would be the hardest night of my life. I was wrong. The real storm didn't start until the funeral, when Evan decided to reveal his true colors. The day of the funeral was cold, gray, and heavy. Even the sky looked like it didn't want to be there. My father's casket sat at the front of the church, surrounded by white lilies and the quiet murmur of people pretending to be heartbroken. I stood in the back for a while, just watching. There were business partners, old friends, a few distant relatives. But I noticed something right away. Evan was in the center of it all, shaking hands, accepting condolences like he was the grieving son of the year. He had that look, sharp suit, polished shoes, crocodile tears, and every few minutes he'd glance at me, smirk slightly, then turn back to his little audience. After the service, the family gathered at our house for what was supposed to be a quiet meal. Instead, it felt like a waiting room before a battle. Everyone whispered the same word, "Will." The lawyer was there too, sitting patiently with a black briefcase on his lap. Calm, professional, watching everything. I remember the sound of glasses clinking, the low hum of fake sympathy. And then, Evan stood up, cleared his throat. And just like that, the room went silent. He looked around with that confident, practiced smile. "I suppose now's the right time to make things clear," he said. "Before Dad passed, he discussed his wishes with me. As his eldest by marriage, he wanted me to take over his estate. Everything." A few people gasped. Others just stared. My heart started pounding. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. Evan went on, talking about how Dad trusted him to continue his legacy, how he was the responsible one. His mother, of course, nodded proudly beside him. It was like watching a bad actor in a movie that everyone already knew the ending to. But he didn't. Then the lawyer stood up, slowly, calmly. He placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and looked straight at Evan. "Mr. Evan," he said in that dry, careful tone lawyers use when they're about to destroy someone's fantasy, "are you absolutely certain about that claim?" Evan puffed his chest. "Of course I am. Dad told me himself." The lawyer paused. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed. A quiet chuckle at first, then a full laugh that cut through the tension like a blade. The room froze. Evan's face turned red. "What's so funny?" he snapped. The lawyer stopped smiling, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "I think you should sit down before you embarrass yourself further." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone turned toward the lawyer. My pulse was racing. I knew this was it, the moment my father had prepared for. But what came next, I could have never predicted. As the lawyer's laughter faded, and the room filled with uneasy whispers, my mind drifted back to those final weeks with my father. The moments I didn't realize were part of something bigger, something deliberate. It all started about 2 months before he passed. Dad had asked me to drive him to his lawyer's office. It wasn't unusual. They'd been working together for years, but this time felt different. He was quieter, sharper, like a man who was setting a trap but didn't want anyone to see the bait. When we got there, he asked me to wait in the lobby. I remember sitting there for almost an hour, watching people come and go, until finally, the lawyer stepped out. He gave me a polite smile and said, "Your father's a very smart man, Daniel. He knows exactly what he's doing." I didn't understand then, but that sentence would echo in my mind later. Over the next few weeks, Dad had several private meetings, some at home, some in the office. Every time Evan tried to join, Dad would politely tell him it was personal business. That phrase alone drove Evan insane. He couldn't stand being left out, and yet, Dad never lost his calm. One evening, I brought him his medication and found him sitting at his desk, staring at an old photo of the two of us when I was a kid. He looked up at me and said, "A man's true wealth isn't what he leaves behind, Daniel. It's who he leaves it with." He smiled faintly, then added, "I've made sure the right hands will hold what I built." At the time, I thought he meant emotionally, like passing on his values or wisdom. I had no idea he meant literally. A week later, he met with the lawyer again. This time, the stepmother tried to tag along. Dad refused, gently but firmly. She threw a quiet tantrum afterward, whispering about how ungrateful he was, and how Evan deserved to know what was going on. But Dad didn't budge. He just smiled and said, "The truth always finds the patient ones." That same night, I overheard a conversation between him and the lawyer through the slightly open door of his study. I caught only fragments, words like conditional trust, irrevocable, and proof of loyalty. My heart pounded. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't simple. Then, just before his final hospitalization, Dad handed me a sealed envelope. "Keep this safe," he said. "Don't open it unless you have to. The lawyer will know when." When he passed away, I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I tucked it away, hidden, thinking maybe it was just a letter, a goodbye. But now, standing at that funeral, watching the lawyer laugh in Evan's face, I realized that envelope was part of the plan. My father had seen everything coming. The greed, the lies, the manipulation. And he hadn't just prepared for it. He'd built a legal masterpiece to expose it. The lawyer turned toward me next, his expression calm, but serious. "Daniel," he said softly, "your father's final instructions were very clear. Would you like to do the honors?" The entire room turned toward me. My pulse quickened. My stepbrother glared, his smugness melting into confusion. My fingers tightened on that sealed envelope in my pocket. That was the moment I realized. My father hadn't left chaos behind. He had left justice. The lawyer's words hit the room like a thunderclap. "Would you like to do the honors, Daniel?" he said again, his voice calm, steady. The kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly how things are about to unfold. Everyone turned toward me. My stepbrother's smug expression flickered. My stepmother's fake smile froze halfway. And there I was, standing with that sealed envelope in my hand. The one my father gave me weeks before he passed. I walked slowly to the lawyer's side. You could have heard a pin drop. My hands were shaking just enough to make the paper crinkle. I slid the envelope across the table. The lawyer nodded, opened it carefully, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. My father's handwriting. Bold and clear, he began to read. "My estate, my company, and all my assets are to be handled according to the terms discussed with my attorney. These terms are final, and no claim made outside this agreement shall be considered valid." Evan shifted in his chair. "Wait, what agreement?" he blurted out. The lawyer ignored him and kept reading. "In recognition of loyalty, integrity, and love shown without expectation, I leave my estate to my son, Daniel." Gasps filled the room. My heart stopped for a second. Evan's jaw dropped. His mother went pale. The lawyer looked up, eyes sharp as glass. "As for Mr. Evan," he continued, his voice carrying a faint tone of irony, "your father left specific instructions." He flipped the page, scanning it with the faintest grin. "To my stepson Evan," he read aloud, "I leave the contents of the black box in my office safe. Inside, he will find what he truly earned." Evan stood up, furious. What the hell is that supposed to mean? The lawyer closed the document and leaned back slightly. It means, he said, pausing for effect, your father didn't forget you. He just knew exactly what you deserved. The room erupted into whispers. I didn't know whether to cry, smile, or just breathe again. Evan, red with anger, stormed out toward the office down the hall. The rest of us followed, unsure of what he'd find. He tore open the safe, yanked out a small black box, and flipped the lid open. Inside was a $1 bill and a letter. The lawyer motioned for him to read it out loud. His hands were shaking as he unfolded it. My dear Evan, I always believed that effort should be rewarded. You've spent years trying to take what isn't yours. So, here's your prize. $1 for all the effort you put into pretending to be family. The color drained from Evan's face. His mother gasped, then turned away, humiliated. The lawyer folded his hands and said, That was why I laughed, Evan. Your father was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. Evan exploded, shouting, denying, blaming. But the lawyer was unmoved. The will was ironclad, witnessed, and registered. There was nothing he could do. I stood there in silence, the weight of years lifting off my chest. My father had seen through every lie, every fake gesture, every bit of greed. He'd orchestrated his own final act of justice, and he did it with the kind of brilliance that made even the lawyer laugh. For a long moment, no one said a word. The air was thick with shock and disbelief. Then the lawyer looked at me and said quietly, Your father wanted you to know. He never doubted you, not for a second. That was it. That was the moment everything changed. The silence after that moment was deafening. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath. My stepbrother just stood there, clutching that $1 bill like it might suddenly turn into something else. Anything else. His face was pale, eyes wild, chest heaving like he'd just been punched by reality itself. My stepmother broke first. This is absurd, she hissed, turning on the lawyer. There must be some mistake. My husband would never— The lawyer cut her off smoothly. Ma'am, your husband signed these documents himself, witnessed and recorded. There's no mistake, only truth. Evan slammed the box shut, glaring at me with pure hatred. You think you won, don't you? He snapped. You always wanted this, his money, his company, everything. I stared at him, calm but trembling inside. No, Evan, I said quietly. I just wanted peace. You wanted everything else. He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. I could see the rage behind his eyes. The kind that comes when someone's pride is stripped bare in front of everyone they tried to impress. But before he could say another word, the lawyer spoke again. Mr. Evan, he said coldly, if I were you, I'd leave before the staff calls security. This is no longer your home. That did it. Evan looked around. At the family, the guests, the people who'd once whispered about his charm and now whispered about his downfall. Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. His mother followed, muttering curses under her breath. But even she knew it was over. The masks were off, and there was nothing left to hide behind. The lawyer turned to me and said, Your father trusted you with more than his estate, Daniel. He trusted you to protect his legacy. Don't waste it. Then he shook my hand and left, briefcase in hand, as calm as he'd been when he laughed earlier. When the house finally emptied, I sat alone in my father's study, the same room where he used to plan his life, where he'd laughed, worked, dreamed. The silence felt different now. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I opened the top drawer of his desk and found another note, written in his handwriting. If you're reading this, son, then you've already seen what greed can do. Remember, people who chase what isn't theirs always lose what they had. Don't be like them. Build, protect, forgive, but never forget. For the first time since his passing, I smiled, not because I had inherited anything, but because I finally understood him. My father didn't just outsmart them. He taught them a lesson they'd never forget. And maybe that was the real inheritance all along. In the weeks that followed, the house felt different. Quieter, lighter, almost like it was finally breathing again. The tension that used to hang in every corner was gone. For the first time, I could walk through my father's home without feeling like I was being watched, without hearing the echo of my stepbrother's fake politeness or my stepmother's constant sighs. I spent most of my days in my father's study, going through his papers, sorting things out, and trying to understand the full extent of what he'd built. The company, the estate, the investments, all neatly organized, protected, and transferred to me exactly as he'd planned. It wasn't just wealth he left behind. It was order. It was purpose, but I didn't rush to claim it all. I wanted to do it right. I called the employees he'd worked with for years, told them nothing was changing, that the company would continue to run with his same values: honesty, loyalty, and fairness. A few of them cried on the phone. One said, "Your father would be proud of you." That meant more to me than anything written in his will. I visited his grave often. The first few times I just stood there in silence, not knowing what to say. But one morning, as the sun rose over the cemetery, I placed that $1 bill, the same one my stepbrother had been given, at the base of his headstone. "Your plan worked, Dad," I whispered. "You taught me everything I needed to know, even after you were gone." I didn't see Evan or his mother again. Word got around that they'd left town, embarrassed, broke, and desperate. Some people said he tried to start a new business, but it failed. Others said he was still chasing easy money. Either way, I stopped caring. My father had already settled that score. Now, whenever I walk through the office or sit in his old chair, I can almost hear his voice, calm, confident, telling me to stay humble, stay strong, and never let bitterness poison what he built. And you know what? He was right, because in the end, the real revenge wasn't taking everything my stepbrother wanted. It was living peacefully with everything my father left behind. It was honoring his name by doing the one thing Evan never could, earning respect, not demanding it. So when people ask what it feels like to win, I tell them it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like closure. And sometimes, that's the sweetest kind of justice there is. The sun was setting the last time I visited my father's grave. The air was still, and the light hit the stone just right, making his name glow in gold. I stood there quietly for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The lies, the greed, the laughter that started it all, and the peace that finally followed. I realized something that day. My father didn't just leave behind an estate. He left behind wisdom. He knew that money fades, but truth has a way of surviving everything. I looked down at the flowers I'd placed, smiled, and said softly, "You were right, Dad. In the end, people show who they are." And then I walked away, not as the son who lost a father, but as the man he raised me to be, strong, patient, and unshakable. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs time, and a plan smart enough to outlive the people who think they can't be beaten. So if you've ever been betrayed, underestimated, or pushed aside, remember this: patience is the quietest form of revenge, and truth always finds its way home. Thank you for listening to my story. If it hit home for you, if it reminded you that karma never forgets, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this, they're not just about revenge. They're about justice, timing, and the quiet power of knowing who you are.